May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Can't breathe, sir. Can't breathe. Breathe, sir. I can't breathe. Can't breathe, sir. Can't breathe. Still can't breathe. Still can't breathe, sir. Those were the last known words of Manuel-Ellis, a 33-year-old man from Tacoma who died on March 3rd, 2020. He said those words over the course of 2 minutes while in police custody. And before he said those words, he had been tackled to the ground. He had been punched in the head over and over and over again. He had been choked into unconsciousness, and he was tased 3 times with 2 taser probes still stuck in his chest. And as he said those words, he was on the ground, on his stomach, pressed to the ground by an officer on his back. Despite enduring all of that, the only thing he said was, "I can't breathe, sir." We know that all these 3 defendants heard him say it, but they chose to do nothing. They didn't help him. Instead, Mr. Ellis was told to shut the fuck up. They could have brought him up, make sure he could breathe, but they didn't. Instead, they kept him down on the ground, pressed him against the pavement with an officer on his back. Defendant Timothy Rankin, a 200-pound man, got on top of Mr. Ellis and kneeled on him for about 6 minutes after he had last said, "I can't breathe, sir." When the first paramedics arrived at the scene, it was now about 9 minutes after Mr. Ellis had last said, "I can't breathe, sir." The paramedic found Mr. Ellis unresponsive. His eyes were fixed in place. His pupils were dilated. In the paramedic's presence, Mr. Ellis stopped breathing altogether. His body, starved of oxygen, shut down. His heart stopped beating. Mr. Ellis died right there in the street. He didn't even make it to the hospital. He died right there in the street because, as he told these 3 defendants repeatedly, he could not breathe. We are here today because none of this should have happened. Mr. Ellis should not have died that night. He should not have been held down to the pavement with an officer on his back. And the evidence will show that Mr. Ellis did nothing wrong. And he should not have been punched. He should not have been choked. He should not have been tased. He should not have been restrained. And he should not have been arrested. He shouldn't have died that night. Now, how did this happen? I'm going to take you to the evening of March 3rd, 2020. And it was a normal evening for Mr. Ellis. He had gone to church earlier that evening. And after returning home from church, he had dinner at his house with his housemates. And after dinner, he went for a walk to go get some snacks. And people who know Mr. Ellis will tell you that he loves his snacks. And this is what he does regularly. He'll take on a walk, go to the 7-Eleven, and buy some snacks. So he goes to a nearby 7-Eleven, and he purchases a box of donuts and a gallon of water. And this is not the actual evidence, but this is what he purchased at the store.
Based on the court's prior rulings on what can be used in opening statement.
It's not.
Thank you.
This is demonstrative, Your Honor. This is not evidence.
Well, sustained. Put those away.
Mr. Ellis goes to 7-Eleven, makes his purchase. Then he starts his walk home. He walks eastbound on 96th Street South, and then he gets to 96 in Ainsworth. You'll hear from 3 eyewitnesses at the intersection, and these 3 eyewitnesses will tell you what they saw. They will tell you that they saw Mr. Ellis walking on the sidewalk, just walking on the sidewalk. They'll tell you that there was a patrol car stopped at the intersection. And we know inside the patrol car was Defendant Collins and Burbank. We know that Defendant Collins was driving the car, patrol car, and Officer Burbank was sitting in the passenger seat. The eyewitnesses will tell you that they see Mr. Ellis walking on the sidewalk. It appears someone in the patrol car called him over, got his attention. So they see Mr. Ellis walk over to the passenger side of the patrol car. They see a brief conversation take place. Then they see Mr. Ellis turn his back to the patrol car and start stepping away. Then they see the passenger door suddenly swing open and Mr. Ellis's door check knocked down by the door by Officer Burbank. Then the witnesses see both officers jump out and start attacking Mr. Ellis. He's pushed to the ground and he's punched over and over and over again. These 3 witnesses are shocked at what they're seeing. And 2 of them took out their phones and started recording. One of those witnesses is Sarah McDowell. She was in the car directly behind the patrol car at the intersection. And she got out of her car and started yelling at the officers. She yelled, "Stop hitting him, just arrest him." Behind her was her ex-boyfriend, Keon Lowry, and he had their daughters, 2 daughters in the back seat. He was also shocked at what he was seeing, and he leans out and yells, "Y'all in the wrong right now." The 3rd witness at the intersection is Seth Cowden. He was on Ainsworth. Mr. Cowden was here, and he had a different view, but he was also shocked at what he saw, what he was seeing, and he started recording with his cell phone. You will see Mr. Cowden's cell phone video, and you will see Ms. McDowell's cell phone video. And in those videos, you'll see Officer Burbank tackling Mr. Ellis and pushing him to the ground. You will see Officer Collins then get on top of Mr. Ellis, and you'll see him strike down repeatedly on Mr. Ellis's face and head. And you'll hear on the audios, on the videos, Mr. Ellis screaming in pain with each strike. And you'll see Officer Collins get behind Mr. Ellis, and you'll see him wrap his arm around his neck in a chokehold. And in the video, you will see Mr. Ellis go limp and go unconscious. And you will also see Officer Burbank pull out his taser as Officer Collins had Mr. Ellis by the neck. And you'll see Officer Burbank fire a round of taser into Mr. Ellis's chest, sending 50,000 volts of electricity into his chest, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now, you'll also hear about a 4th eyewitness, Ayanna White. She lives in this house in the corner. She will tell you that she heard the commotion outside, looked out her bedroom window, and sees an officer attacking Mr. Ellis. All 4 of these eyewitnesses didn't know each other, besides, of course, Keon and Sarah. But none of these 4 witnesses knew Mr. Ellis or the officers or each other. And they will all tell you the same thing. Throughout all that Mr. Ellis had endured, throughout all what the officers were doing to him, he never fought back. He never struck back at the officers. And they will tell you that it was the officers that was attacking Mr. Ellis. And despite all that Mr. Ellis had to endure, he said one thing: "Can't breathe, sir. Sir, I can't breathe." The witnesses that left the scene drove off. And as they drove away, they captured the last moments of Mr. Ellis's life. The videos will show that Collins and Burbank were on top of Mr. Ellis after having tased him twice already. He was under their control as they were driving away. Shortly after they drove off, Defendant Timothy Rankin arrives on the scene, partner Officer Ford. Timothy Rankin and Officer Ford jumps out of the car and runs over. And Defendant Rankin then helps Officer Collins hold Mr. Ellis to the ground. In the meantime, Officer Burbank retrieves a strap, and you'll see this during trial. It's called a hobble cord, but it's like a cargo strap. And Officer Burbank uses that strap to tie Mr. Ellis's ankles together and connect it to his handcuffs. So Mr. Ellis is essentially hogtied. So, hogtied in that position, Defendant Timothy Rankin decided to get on top of Mr. Ellis. And he sits on top of Mr. Ellis for at least 6 minutes after Mr. Ellis has said, "I can't breathe, sir." And Defendant Timothy Rankin will admit to investigators a few days after this incident that he heard Mr. Ellis say, "I can't breathe." But he chose to do nothing. Instead, he put him in the prone position on his stomach and got on top of him. And he will admit that he stayed on top of Mr. Ellis until fire arrived, which is 10 minutes after Mr. Ellis last said, "I can't breathe, sir." The evidence will show that the defendants chose not to help Mr. Ellis, despite all of their training. Despite all the training, they didn't move Mr. Ellis off his stomach. They didn't remove his restraints. They didn't remove the spit hood. And they didn't set him up to make sure he was breathing. And contrary to all their training, they kept him prone on the pavement with Defendant Rankin on his back. And so they did nothing to help Mr. Ellis. And Mr. Ellis slowly died, slowly asphyxiated. He couldn't get the oxygen he needed, so his body and his heart shut down. Paramedics arrived and they tried to do everything they could, but it was too late at that point. They did everything they could to try to save Mr. Ellis, but it was too late. Mr. Ellis was pronounced dead right there in the street at 96 and Ainsworth, surrounded by the defendants that had done this to him. Now, before I talk more about the evidence and about the encounter, I do want to spend a moment to talk about the 3 defendants in this case. You'll learn that, and I've mentioned already, that Officer Burbank and Collins were partners that night. Officer Rankin was partners with another officer, Officer Ford. And those two were in a patrol car together. Collins and Burbank were in the patrol car together at the intersection. Matthew Collins joined the Tacoma Police Department in 2015. He's an experienced officer. He is an officer, but he also trains other officers on how to detain, control, and arrest a suspect. And you also hear that he is a proficient grappler. He was captain of the grappling team in the Army. Officer Christopher Burbank is also an experienced officer. He started in 2011 in North Carolina working for the Winston-Salem Police Department. He then joined the Tacoma Police Department in 2015. Officer Timothy Rankin joined the Tacoma Police Department in 2018 after having completed his training at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center, as well as Officer Collins. As the judge has informed you, this is the opening statements. It is our opportunity to tell you what the state will present, give you a summary of the evidence the state will present in this case. But before I get into more details about the evidence, I do want to talk about the charges in this case. The state of Washington brought criminal charges against all 3 of these defendants for the death of Manuel Ellis. the state has charged Defendant Collins and Burbank with second-degree felony murder. Now, at the end of this case, the judge will instruct you further about the law that applies to this charge. But it's important to note to you that the defendants are not charged with intentional murder. This is a different type of murder. And the judge will instruct you about the law at the end of the case. And what I expect the judge to instruct you is that the state does not have to prove that.
Any instructions or the law in an opening statement?
Sustained.
Thank you.
What you will learn is that the instruction, well, you also learn that these two defendants are charged alternatively with manslaughter in the first degree. And you'll learn that Officer Timothy Rankin is also charged with manslaughter in the first degree. And again, the judge will provide instructions to you at the end of the case. What do I anticipate the instructions will be, and what you need to know for now, is what that state needs to establish that.
I'm sorry, objection, Your Honor, same basis.
I'm not sure. Mr. Liu, continue what you were saying. I'm not sure that it was.
Certainly, Your Honor. You'll learn from the judge, when you're given the instructions, that what the state has to establish is that the defendants acted in a criminally reckless manner that caused Mr. Ellis's death. Now, I want to talk about the evidence that the state will present to you during this case. And I'm going to start by telling you about Manny Ellis and the last day of his life. His friends and family call him Manny. You will learn that he loved music and he loved playing the drums. You'll learn that he has a mom, Marcia, sister, Monet, brother, Matthew. He has nieces and nephews and other family members that loved him. You also learn that he had a daughter named Alexis, who was 3 years old at the time of his death, whom he loved very much. You will also learn that the church and his faith meant a lot to him. And you also learn about some of the struggles he had. In fact, going to church that night is how he started the evening. He went to church with Cedric Armstrong and Kimberly Mays. This is the couple that ran the clean and sober home that he was living in at the time of his death. And you'll learn that a clean and sober home is for people like Mr. Ellis who have struggled with addiction. Mr. Ellis, you will learn, has struggled with addiction through most of his adult life, and in particular to methamphetamine. He worked hard on it, but he relapsed at times, but it has caused a lot of pain in his life. And it culminated in a scary incident in 2019 where he was in a meth-induced psychosis, was naked on the street, and was confronted by officers, and he was arrested. That was a scary incident for him, and it was a turning point for him. He started to change his life, started to engage in treatment and attending church on a regular basis. With the support of his family, Mr. Ellis went into the clean and sober home with Kimberly and Cedric. And he was still working on his recovery. And it's difficult, as many of you can imagine, with Mr. Ellis having gone through that for most of his adult life. And he relapses on occasion, and you'll hear he relapsed on March 3rd. But he was doing all the things that he could to try to change his life around. And he was trying to balance living a normal life with his addiction. Now, you will hear about the events of March 3rd and what Mr. Ellis was doing that night. And this is important because you will learn that he was having a normal evening, and everyone that interacted with him will tell you that he was his normal, happy self. He started that evening going to church at 7 p.m. with Cedric and Kim. And they were doing a revival, which is a several-day stretch of worship and music. And in fact, it was Mr. Ellis that suggested that they go that night. Cedric and Kim will tell you that they were tired and wanted to stay home, but Mr. Ellis was excited. He wanted to go. And during church, he played the drums. They returned home at about 9 p.m., and during the drive home, he was telling Cedric and Kim how excited he was, how he wanted his mom and his sister to come to church. When they got home, Mr. Ellis placed a phone call with Tiana Matt. This is Alexis' mom. Tiana is Mr. Ellis's former girlfriend, and they have the child in common, and she was 3 years old at the time. And you'll hear from Tiana Matt. She will tell you that Mr. Ellis calls Alexis every night to say goodnight to her, to wish her goodnight, and to tell her he loves her. And you'll hear from Miss Matt that Mr. Ellis was his normal, happy self that night. And you'll learn that after that, he had a call with his friend, Brandon McClanahan. It was a short conversation, but Brandon will also tell you that he spoke to Mr. Ellis and he was his normal self, nothing unusual. And then he had a FaceTime call with his mom, Marcia. And you will hear about that call, and Marcia will tell you that he was happy, he was excited about church. He talked to her about what he did that night. And he was talking about his plans, about how he wanted to get his life together, and he wanted to start a business. Mr. Ellis' sister, Monet, was in the house with Marcia, and she overheard that conversation, and she could hear Marcia and Mr. Ellis laughing during the call. It was a good call. That would be the last time Marcia would speak to her son, and that would be the last time Monet would hear from her brother. A little bit after he spoke to Marcia, Mr. Ellis went out for his walk to the 7-Eleven to get his snacks. You will learn that Mr. Ellis took this particular route to the 7-Eleven. He goes from the residence, from this clean and sober home, goes eastbound, then goes up north on Ainsworth, then goes westbound on 96 to get to the 7-Eleven because he wanted to avoid a certain part of that area. So he takes this roundabout way to get there. And you'll hear more evidence about that during trial. And you'll hear from the clerk at the 7-Eleven, and she will tell you that she recognized him as a regular, and there was nothing out of the ordinary that night with Mr. Ellis. He came in and made his purchases. And Mr. Ellis then started walking back home. He was walking eastbound on 96th Street when he came upon 96 and Ainsworth. That night, as I mentioned, Officer Burbank and Collins were on patrol together when he encountered Mr. Ellis walking on the sidewalk. Just before this, about 2 to 3 minutes before this, those two officers had been at a prior traffic stop about a mile away for a headlights violation. And Officer Ford and Rankin backed them up on that call. And from their location, the previous stop on 96, it takes about 2 minutes to get to this intersection. So they would have arrived to clear that call about 11:19. They would have arrived at the intersection about 11:21. You also learned that from walking from the 7-Eleven to this intersection would have taken about 10 minutes. And we know that Mr. Ellis made a purchase at 11:11. So he would have reached the intersection about 11:21. So they would have gotten there about the same time. Now, as I indicated, this is an overhead view of the intersection where the event took place. What you will learn is that Officer Collins and Officer Burbank were stopped right here at the stop line. And you'll learn that the 3 civilian witnesses arrived shortly thereafter. Sarah McDowell was in her car directly behind the officers, and Keon Lowry, with their 2 kids in the back seat, was stopped behind her. And you will see and you will hear That's Seth Cowden. He's a pizza delivery driver. He was here. Seth Cowden was delivering pizzas that night, and he had just completed a delivery and was on his way back to the store when he saw what occurred. You'll also hear from the fourth witness I mentioned earlier, Ayanna White. She lives in this house right here. And she looked out her bedroom window. During the trial, you will hear from each of the civilian witnesses, Sarah, Keon, Seth, and Ayanna. And what all four of these witnesses will tell you is that Mr. Ellis was not aggressive, was not violent, never attacked the officers. In fact, it was the officers that was attacking Mr. Ellis. They all saw the same thing. And again, none of these witnesses, besides Sarah and Keon, knew each other. And what these three witnesses will tell you is that Manny Ellis was walking on the sidewalk here when he was then called over, or someone in the patrol car got his attention, and he walked over to the passenger side of the patrol car. And what they will tell you is that a brief conversation occurred. Mr. Ellis then started stepping away, and the passenger door swung open, and that was Officer Burbank, knocking him to the ground. And again, what they will tell you is that a struggle ensued where the officers jumped on Mr. Ellis, pushing him to the ground, started punching him and tasing him, and that all occurred right here in this intersection, right here in this part of the street here. You will see the videos taken by Sarah McDowell. She's here, and she has her cell phone video, and she's recording what's taking place right here. And you'll see the cell phone video from Seth Cowden, who has a different angle, and his angle is from here, and you'll see both of their videos in this trial. And what you will see in these videos is from Seth Cowden's video. What you will see is Officer Collins wrapping his arms around Mr. Ellis's neck, pulling him back. You will learn that this is an unapproved restraint. What he was doing was applying this technique called the LVNR. It cuts off the blood circulation to the brain, cuts off the carotids, and it causes the subject to go temporarily unconscious. This is a dangerous maneuver that the Tacoma Police Department does not allow their officers to be trained on. Yet Officer Collins went ahead and performed that chokehold anyways. What the video will also show is while Officer Collins is placing him in that restraint, you'll see Mr. Ellis hold up his hands, his arms, palms up in a surrender position as he's being jerked, is being pulled back and being choked by Officer Collins. And what you also see is Defendant Burbank with a taser out pointing at Mr. Ellis's chest. And Mr. Ellis is giving up, like, stop, give up. You'll see Mr. Ellis then pull back to the ground by Officer Collins. And when Mr. Ellis goes to the ground, he again raises his arms up in a surrender. And he's being choked at the same time. And what you'll see is Officer Burbank then fire a round of taser into his chest. And you'll learn that officers are trained not to target the chest because it's dangerous. But despite his training, he did it anyways. And that causes 50,000 volts of electricity to go into Mr. Ellis. And he's doing that as Officer Collins has Mr. Ellis by the neck, choking him. And what you will see is in the video is that Mr. Ellis reacts to the bolt of electricity initially, but then he goes still, unconscious. You'll see his head drop because at this point, Officer Collins has successfully applied the LVNR and Mr. Ellis is unconscious. Mr. Ellis, you'll see, regains consciousness a few seconds later. He's now on his stomach with 2 taser probes underneath him in his chest. And he's pressed to the ground by the officers. You'll see Officer Collins on top of him. You'll see Officer Burbank with one of his knees on top of Mr. Ellis. During this, Mr. Ellis is in pain, and he's struggling, probably struggling for breath. And you'll see Officer Collins or Officer Burbank slip off of Mr. Ellis. His knee comes off, and as that happens, he applies another round of 50,000 volts into Mr. Ellis. And you'll see Mr. Ellis's reaction. He screams. He's flailing from the pain of the 50,000 volts of electricity into his body. And he flails his legs in pain, but eventually he stops moving. And you'll see Officer Burbank and Officer Collins on top of Mr. Ellis. At that point, the witnesses at the scene started to drive away. Seth takes a turn here and starts driving off. Sarah, in the meantime, went around the patrol car, and Mr. Ellis is here. And you'll see cell phone video footage by Sarah and Seth showing those 2 officers on top of Mr. Ellis after that second blast of taser. They have him under control at this point. He's not moving. They have him, they're on top of him. But the defendants are not done with Mr. Ellis yet. As Seth, Sarah, and Keon leave the scene, and just as they leave the scene, you'll learn that Officer Burbank applies a 3rd application of taser into Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis was underneath, pinned onto the ground by Collins and Burbank at this point, but Burbank applies a 3rd round of taser. He did this even though he's been trained that you should apply the taser only when it is necessary to overcome active resistance by an individual. And you will see in the video that Mr. Ellis wasn't actively resisting. And he wasn't a threat. And he wasn't doing anything to deserve that 3rd blast of electricity into his body. All 4 of these witnesses will tell you throughout all this that Mr. Ellis never fought back, never struck at the officers, and that it was the officers that were attacking him. And it's important, and it's important to know that police officers are trained that they can only use force if it is necessary to achieve a lawful purpose. Even if officers have a basis to arrest someone, if that person is not fighting them, they can't just start a fight. And even if a subject is resisting, officers can only use the amount of force reasonable to overcome that resistance. They don't get to just inflict pain because they're fearful or because they want to or because they're angry. If someone needs to be placed under arrest, their job is to just arrest him. And that's a phrase that you will hear from Ms. McDowell when she was yelling at the officers to stop hitting Mr. Ellis. She said, "Stop hitting him, just arrest him." That's what officers are trained to do, to just arrest an individual, not to strike them, assault them. But that's not what they did here. After the witnesses leave the intersection, we have no more cell phone footage to see. But we do have a doorbell camera at Ms. White's house. And her doorbell camera captures important audio. She will capture, the video will capture the last words from Mr. Ellis. "30 seconds after Sarah, Keon, and Seth leave the scene. The doorbell camera captures Mr. Ellis, and he's saying, "I can't breathe, sir." (11:23:28). The doorbell camera captures Mr. Ellis saying, "Can't breathe, sir, can't breathe." A few seconds later, you'll hear the doorbell camera, Mr. Ellis saying, "Breathe, sir." In response, one of the two officers, Collins or Burbank, says, "Shut the fuck up, man." And you'll hear that in the audio. (11:24, 52 seconds). You'll hear Mr. Ellis again. "I can't breathe." This time, Defendant Rankin now is at the scene, arriving a few seconds before this. And Defendant Rankin is there to hear this. About 10 seconds later, you'll hear Mr. Ellis again. "Can't breathe, sir." And again, Mr. Ellis is on the pavement in a prone position. At this point, after Officer Rankin arrived, he's placed in the hogtie restraints. He's now at this point in hogtie on the pavement. And he's saying, "Can't breathe, sir." This last transmission, 20 seconds later, is actually captured not on the doorbell camera, but from a radio transmission that one of the officers at the scene makes. At this point, there are a number of officers at the scene. The situation is under control. Mr. Ellis is prone on his stomach, hogtied, with Defendant Rankin on his back. And in that transmission, you'll hear the officer saying, "Slow incoming," meaning all incoming units, you can slow down now. We have everything under control. That's the broadcast. And in that broadcast, in the background, Mr. Ellis, in a desperate voice, you can hear, says, still can't breathe, sir." and you'll hear that audio. One of the interesting things about all of this, about "I can't breathe, sir, I can't breathe," we hear Mr. Ellis politely saying, "Can't breathe, sir." When Collins and Burbank were interviewed by investigators a couple days after this incident, they were asked specifically whether Mr. Ellis said anything. They both said no. They denied that Mr. Ellis has spoken any intelligible words. Instead, what they told investigators is that they described Mr. Ellis as growling and making animalistic noises, not saying anything verbal. Now, you'll be the judge of whether he was being animalistic, growling, when he's sitting, when we have this evidence. "Can't breathe, sir. Sir, can't breathe." The evidence showed that Mr. Ellis said he can't breathe numerous times, but even once should have been enough. Even if Mr. Ellis said, "I can't breathe, sir," once, that should have been enough for the officers to help him, to do something for him, but they didn't. You'll learn during this trial that police officers are taught that they have a duty to help people in their custody, because once a person is restrained, hog-tied, handcuffed.
I'm sorry.
I know the basis of the deal, and so I'm going to excuse the jury for just a minute. Ms. Jones, please do not discuss the case. Don't worry, we'll get it on the record. Yes, go ahead, Owen. Did Hannah go around to meet them? Okay. Okay. Please be seated. The objection, as I understand it, had to do with the use of the word hog tie.
Well, not as much. I mean, to some degree, Your Honor, but the issue that I was objecting to there was Mr. Liu getting into the training. I believe Mr. Conrad laid out, and the court previously ruled that that was not something the court that the station at this point.
If he can reasonably, he expects that the testimony is going to talk about the training of the officer. He believes that in good faith, and my understanding of this, there is a good faith basis for that. There's no problem with that. With respect to the issue of hog tying, I mean, I believe Mr. Collins made a motion in limine with respect to that, and what I said was, if memory serves, something like, well, I'm not going to make it an order, but I don't want people to introduce gratuitously the term hog tie. This has been used at least 3 times, I believe, by Mr. Liu this morning. So on this third occasion, he just mentioned it, you raised your objection, I just assumed that that was what it was. Certainly he can indicate that he was bound, and he can describe how he was bound, but just try to avoid that word. I think it's a little bit loaded under the circumstances. I'm not going to find there's any violation of an order at this point. There isn't any. Anyway, any reason we can't have the jury come back now?
No, Your Honor.
We all understand where we are?
Yes, Your Honor.
Understanding that.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's have the jury back. See, this is the problem. This is when he can't get back there. Okay. You guys can all be seated. If you want to come back and stand up when the jury comes back in, that's fine. Or if you want to remain standing until they arrive, that's fine too. Shouldn't be too long. Mr. Liu, any rough idea how much longer you've got?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Any rough idea how much longer you've got?
I'm sorry.
Any rough idea how much longer?
Oh, 20 minutes.
20 minutes? That should work, because I'm looking at when the break's coming up. 20 minutes should be fine. I don't want to interrupt it unnecessarily.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm not hearing what you guys are saying, so. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Please be seated. You set? There we go. Mr. Liu, continue when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before the break, I was talking about the police officer's duty to help people in their custody. You know, once someone is restrained, they can't help themselves. They can't move themselves to a better position if they can't breathe. And police officers are trained to pay attention to people in their custody and control, that they have to take care of them to make sure that they can breathe. And the evidence will show that these three defendants did nothing to help Mr. Ellis. Even as he pleaded with him over and over again, can't breathe, they did nothing for him. Instead, what do? They keep him on the ground, on his stomach, and they grab a hobble cord, wrap it around his ankle, ties it to his handcuffs that's behind his back. And you will learn that police officers are trained about the dangers of prone positioning, because it can lead to something called positional asphyxia. It's where the body is positioned in a way that it restricts their breathing and it prevents the body from getting the oxygen they need. Police officers are trained on that. And police officers are taught that putting someone in the prone position on their stomach is a transitional position. That you could put someone in the prone position to handcuff them, but you should immediately get them up, sit them up, put them in the patrol car. You don't just leave them in the prone position. But these three defendants disregarded their training. Even after hearing Mr. Ellis say, he can't breathe, and even as he was struggling to breathe, they left him on his stomach, restrained, with his ankles tied together with a strap connected to his handcuffs in that position. Now, you will hear the defendant say, well, he was still struggling, he was still moving around. But you will learn from an expert in this case that it is akin to someone drowning. When they're desperate for air, when you're struggling to breathe, you'll struggle, try to move to get air. And that's what was happening to Mr. Ellis. He was prone on the ground, already telling the officers, can't breathe, sir, can't breathe, numerous times. He was struggling to breathe. The fire department did not arrive until 11:34. Fire didn't get there until 11:34. Close to 10 minutes after Mr. Ellis last said, still can't breathe, sir, over that transmission. What happened during those 10 minutes? You will learn that Defendant Rankin, in his statement to the investigators, that during those 10 minutes, he kept Mr. Ellis in a prone position on his stomach, hogtied with his own weight on top of him. You'll hear his statement to the investigators that Mr. Ellis was in 4-point restraints. Again, ankles being bound together, strapped to his handcuffs. And he said in that position, he got on top of Mr. Ellis, pressed him to the ground because somehow he thought Mr. Ellis was still a danger. Defendant Rankin will tell you that he will say during the statement to the investigators that he briefly rolled Mr. Ellis to his side to sweep for weapons. Finding none, he then says, well, Mr. Ellis started thrashing around violently. So he rose Mr. Ellis back onto his stomach, then got on top of him and reapplied pressure on him until fire got there. So except for a brief moment when he checked Mr. Ellis for weapons, Mr. Ellis was on his stomach in the prone position with Officer Rankin on top of him for all that time. That was 10 minutes. In fact, he told the investigators that as fire arrived, I still had control of the guy's upper body. My right knee was around the right shoulder blade area of him, and my left knee was on the middle of his back still. Medical experts will tell you that by that time, by the time the fire arrived, it was too late. Mr. Ellis had already been starved of oxygen to the point that they couldn't revive him. And during those 10 minutes, Officer Burbank and Collins remained on the scene in this area. And they did nothing to help Mr. Ellis. You will learn that a total of 20 officers arrived at the scene eventually from several different agencies. And you will hear from many of those officers regarding their observations. And to put it frankly, their observations and descriptions of what they saw is all over the place. For example, they had different testimonies regarding whether Mr. Ellis was having trouble breathing or not. They couldn't agree what position he was in. Was he on his side? Was he on his stomach? In fact, one officer said he was on his back. But we know what position Mr. Ellis was in because Officer Rankin, the officer that was hands-on with Mr. Ellis, told investigators that. There are many contradictions between these officers about what they saw, and you'll be the judge of their credibility. You'll also hear about a decision to put a spit hood on Mr. Ellis. The spit hood is issued by the Tacoma Police Department, and it comes with a warning. And the warning says that the spit hood should not be used on anyone having difficulty breathing. Yet a spit hood was put over his head, and the people that knew he was having difficult breathing, Officer Collins, Burbank, and Rankin, heard him say, "Can't breathe, can't breathe," yet they did nothing as that spit hood was placed over Mr. Ellis's head. And Mr. Ellis was bleeding at that time, and you'll hear a description by one of the officers at the scene. In fact, the officer that put the spit hood on him. All three of these officers, all three of these defendants knew that Mr. Ellis couldn't breathe, was having difficult breathing, but they did nothing and just stood by and allowed this to happen. In fact, after Mr. Ellis died, 8 hours after his death, the medical examiner examined that spit hood, and he found that the spit hood was covered with blood and mucus from Mr. Ellis's nose and mouth. And the medical examiner determined that that mask played a significant factor in Mr. Ellis's death. During this trial, you'll also be asked to determine the credibility of Officer Burbank and Collins. They provided statements to investigators after the incident. Officer Burbank and Collins, you'll hear, claim that Mr. Ellis wasn't walking on the sidewalk as witnesses will tell you, but he was in the middle of the intersection here, trying to get into a moving car, trying to open a car door. Now, they will tell investigators that they thought it was possible carjacking or domestic violence situation. They didn't know. Yet, Officer Collins in this statement says he rolled down his windows and told Mr. Ellis to come on over to his patrol car. You'll learn that this isn't protocol. It's dangerous. Officers are trained not to do that. You also learn that they didn't radio in their stop until after Mr. Ellis had been tased and the LVNR was applied. If they suspected that Mr. Ellis was performing a carjacking, they would have radioed in immediately, but they didn't. And you also learn that Officer Collins, during his statement to investigator, said that as he got out of the patrol car, he ran around the front of the patrol car, and Mr. Ellis was over here on the passenger side. And he will claim that Mr. Ellis lifts him up by his vest into the air and throws him backwards into the street. This is a proficient, experienced grappler. He's an experienced police officer, and you'll learn that he weighs about 200.
Overruled. Continue.
And you'll learn that he weighs about 230 pounds, and he says he was thrown back into the street by Mr. Ellis. None of the eyewitnesses, any of the 4 eyewitnesses, see this happening, and you won't see that in the videos. Officer Collins also in his statement said he attempted to apply the LVNR, but didn't actually go through with it because Officer Burbank tased Mr. Ellis at that point. He says he only attempted. And you will see in the videos that Mr. Ellis passes out from the LVNR. He goes unconscious, he goes limp, and his head drops to the ground. Officer Burbank will tell the investigators that Mr. Ellis had a jug of water in one hand, something else in the other. And we know that's probably the donuts. And he will claim that he was trying to get into a car in the middle of the intersection with these items in his hands. And he will also tell you that during the incident, after he had door checked Mr. Ellis, he got out, and he will tell you that Mr. Ellis chased him 10 to 15 feet into the intersection, screaming and growling, flailing both fists at him, and in jumping type motion, they collided and went down to the ground. Videos don't show this. None of the eyewitnesses will tell you that this happened. We don't see, and we don't know what happens, after this last footage at the scene until fire arrived, as I mentioned, except for one thing. Ms. White actually takes a cell phone video from her house about 1 minute prior to fire's arrival. And you'll see that video where she's scanning the street, and she'll scan over to the intersection, and in her video you'll see a number of police officers standing around Mr. Ellis, talking casually while Mr. Ellis is on the ground with Officer Rankin kneeled on him. This video was taken from her house, and again, what it shows, and it's a little blurry, but you'll be able to see this. You see Officer Rankin in a position near Mr. Ellis's upper body. And recall what Officer Rankin said. He said that as fire arrived upon the scene, I still had control of the guy's upper body. My right knee was around the right shoulder blade area of him, and my left knee was in the middle of his back still. This is what we believe Ms. White's video shows. And this was taken 1 minute prior to fire's arrival. When the fire department arrived, they found Mr. Ellis still had the spit hood over him. He was still restrained. And they knew that the situation was dire, and they wanted Mr. Ellis, the restraints on Mr. Ellis, to be removed. But what was the response? Officer Rankin actually resisted, telling them that he believed Mr. Ellis was still a threat at this point. Incredibly. So they had to get a sergeant involved in order to get the restraints off Mr. Ellis so that the fire department could finally start working on him. And when the fire department started working on him, he was barely breathing. His pupils, as I mentioned before, fixed, dilated. He had shallow breath that ceased, and he went into cardiac arrest. The fire department hooked Mr. Ellis up to a heart monitor, and the heart monitor showed that he had electrical activity but no pulse. This is a condition called pulseless electrical activity. And you will learn from the medical experts that hypoxia, or lack of oxygen, causes PEA, pulseless electrical activity. And despite the fire department's efforts, they spent 40 hours trying to revive Mr. Ellis. He was pronounced dead on 96 in Ainsworth. The next morning, the medical examiner, an autopsy was done by the medical examiner on Mr. Ellis. And you will hear from medical experts by the state. And they will tell you that they all concluded Mr. Ellis's death was caused by hypoxia, lack of oxygen, due to the actions of the defendants. You will hear from a forensic pathologist. You'll hear from an expert on the heart, expert on the lungs. You'll hear from a pulmonologist. You'll also hear from a police surgeon and an epidemiologist. All of these medical experts will testify, and all of them will tell you that they agree with the conclusion of the Pierce County Medical Examiner's Office that Mr. Ellis died from hypoxia due to the actions of the defendants. Now, you will hear the defense argue that Mr. Ellis died not from hypoxia, but from a meth overdose or his heart condition. However, the experts will tell you that death from an overdose or heart condition doesn't cause PEA. It doesn't cause a slow death like you have here. It's a more sudden death. Now, before I finish, I do want to take a minute to talk about what the defense may argue in this case. And keep in mind that the defense has no burden. The burden is on the state to prove these charges to the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But I do anticipate that they will make certain arguments. For instance, they may talk about a smear that's on the passenger window that they will argue is evidence of powdered sugar, to support their argument that Mr. Ellis had somehow had punched the window of the passenger side. Of course, none of the witnesses see this, and that smear was never processed, so we don't know what that smear is. And you also see a photograph of the donut box at the scene. And that donut box was stepped on, but it was never opened. It was still closed. You may also hear the defense attack the credibility of those eyewitnesses, suggesting that they're unreliable because they didn't immediately come forward with their information. You'll learn that Seth Cowden and Sarah McDowell didn't come forward with the videos until sometime after Mr. Ellis' death. And of course, they didn't know that Mr. Ellis died. Sarah McDowell will tell you that she didn't realize what she had seen, what she had filmed that night, was the death of Mr. Ellis until after she saw social media postings about his death. And that's when she came forward with her video. You'll hear from Seth Cowden that he didn't realize what he had also until he read about Mr. Ellis' death in the newspaper. So then he reached out to Mr. Ellis' family lawyer to tell him, I have this video. Same thing with Sarah McDowell. She reached out to Monet because she realized what she had. And defense will try to argue to you that somehow this makes them unreliable. Yet the defense won't be able to explain how any of these eyewitnesses who didn't know each other, who didn't know Mr. Ellis at the time, captured their video and gave you consistent accounts of what occurred at that intersection. And all of them will tell you that it was the officers that attacked Mr. Ellis, that Mr. Ellis never attacked them or was aggressive or violent towards the officers. Now, finally, you will hear the defense put Manny Ellis on trial. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Ellis did struggle with addiction, and you will hear
Argument and proper argument in opening statement, and second, indicating that there's any burden of proof on the defense, or that we have to present anything, or that we will.
Overruled.
Thank you. And you will hear that Mr. Ellis used methamphetamine that night. And you'll hear from the defense about an incident that occurred in 2015 where Mr. Ellis was arrested with a needle in his back pocket. You'll hear that Mr. Ellis got upset when the police found it and struggled with the police ensued. And he was eventually hobbled, handcuffed, and put in 4-point restraints. And I've mentioned before the 2019 incident where he was naked on the street. What the defense want you to believe and what the defense hope to accomplish is to have you assume that just because Mr. Ellis acted in a certain way in 2015, 2019, that's how he acted that night of the incident. But you will hear the evidence, you will hear the witnesses, you will see the videos, you will hear the audios. All of the witnesses that interacted with Mr. Ellis that night will tell you he was his calm, happy self, that he was having a good night. He went to church, played the drums, came home, talked to Tiana, Alexis, talked to Brandon, talked to Marcia. He recorded himself performing a rap on his phone with Bible verses, and you'll see that he was calm, he was happy. And you'll hear, more importantly, from the eyewitnesses at the scene who will tell you that Mr. Ellis was just walking on the sidewalk when he was attacked by the officers, that he wasn't violent towards the officers, that he didn't strike back, that he didn't assault any of the officers. Not only that, you have the videos taken by Sarah McDowell and Seth Cowden that showed Mr. Ellis being assaulted by the officers. Seth Cowden, you'll hear, described it as seeing Mr. Ellis being ragdolled by the officers, and that's what you'll see in the videos, that Mr. Ellis was being ragdolled. And you'll hear the audio. You'll hear Mr. Ellis pleading politely with the officers, "I can't breathe, sir." This is the picture. This is what happened that night versus what they want you to believe, that just because he acted in a certain way back in 2015, 2019, that he acted the same way that night. And that's simply not the case. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the evidence that the state expects to show you during this trial. You will hear from the eyewitnesses. You will see the videos. You will listen to the audio. And you will hear from the experts, the medical experts, who will tell you that Mr. Ellis died not from a drug overdose or his heart condition, but he died from oxygen starvation caused by the actions of these defendants, caused by the assaults on him, by the extreme restraints placed on him, by being placed in the prone position with Officer Rankin on his back. And he died because none of these officers listened to his pleas, his cries for help. They ignored his pleas that he can't breathe. And they chose to keep him in that position, on his stomach, restrained that way with Officer Rankin on his back until he starved of oxygen and he died. You will hear descriptions of Mr. Ellis as growling, acting animalistic, or making animalistic noises. The evidence will show that Manny Ellis was a human being that loved his family. He was flawed. He struggled with addiction and mental health, but he was trying to change his life. He was not an animal, and he deserved the respect and the care that was not given to him when he died that night at the intersection of 96 and Ainsworth. At the end of the case, the state is going to ask that you listen to Mr. Ellis's words. That will be his testimony in this case. And at the end of the case, the state will ask that you return verdicts of guilty as charged on all three defendants. Thank you.